Divorce happens. In fact, it happens to almost 50% of first marriages. So let's talk about it. Welcome to Divorce Happens, a podcast to educate, inspire, support, and yes, make you laugh through divorce and beyond so that you can start fresh on the next phase of your journey. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh.
You'll get divorced. You'll get divorced.
Getting divorced?
I'm getting a divorce.
You're getting a divorce.
Because she's getting a divorce.
So what if I get divorced?
Hi, my name is Jolee Vacchi, and I'm a family law and divorce attorney in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and I'm the founding attorney of Foundations Family Law and Mediation Center.
Okay, Jolee, we have a question for you today that is a question we get a lot. So generally speaking, what happens, how is property divided up during a divorce? What factors kind of go into that? What's considered? I think money obviously is very sensitive to a lot of people. So when you're looking at divorce, just from a general zoomed out perspective, what does this look like?
So this varies from state to state, but there's a lot of similarities across the lines. Massachusetts, where I practice, is an equitable distribution state. And what that really means is that the court is trying to divide the marital estate in a fair and reasonable way. And a lot of people assume that this would just mean that everything's split 50-50. And in some situations, it is pretty much split half for one spouse and half for the other. But that is just kind of like the starting point, and there's a lot more nuance that goes into this. Some of the factors that the court is going to want to consider is how long the marriage has been. If it's a short-term marriage, for example, if it's only 6 months or even a couple of years, there's much more likelihood that, property owned by one spouse prior to the marriage would stay with that individual spouse rather than been split up between the two parties. Whereas if there's been a couple that's been married for 20 years, then the court would probably be more inclined to take everything owned by everybody and divide that more equally. So the length of the marriage is a really important factor. The court is also going to want to look at how old are the parties? What is their health? Are they employed, or do they have the ability to become employed? What's their earning potential in the future? Because if one spouse has been out of the workforce for an extended period of time, or maybe there's a health condition that is, hindering them from making a similar income to their spouse, the court's going to consider this when they're dividing up the property and maybe give that one spouse a little bit more. Another thing is they're going to look at the conduct of the parties during the marriage. And this can be a little bit misleading because most people nowadays are divorcing on no-fault grounds, meaning that you don't have to prove that your spouse was an adulterer or that they abandoned you. You don't have to show a reason to not want to be married anymore. You just want to get divorced, and that's good enough to the court. But the court will consider the conduct of the parties. For example, if one party has an extramarital affair, that's not going to be used for a reason for the divorce to be granted. But if this person spent a substantial amount of the marital assets on this extramarital affair, well, then maybe some of that should be credited back to the other spouse. So that's a way that it could be considered. Another one that's common for the conduct of the parties is gambling. So if one party has a gambling habit that the other one doesn't know about and has, I've had cases like this where there's been hundreds of thousands of dollars spent behind one spouse's back, that could be also considered when dividing the remaining marital estate to compensate the innocent spouse for all of that dissipation of the marital assets. And then finally, some other things that come to mind are the court's going to look at how did this marital estate come to be built? Was it because both parties were working? Was one party working and the other one was a stay-at-home parent? We have some cases where one spouse is working, the other one's not working, but they either don't have children or they have caretakers for the children. So that spouse who isn't really contributing to making an income for the family or helping with the children, maybe they wouldn't be entitled to a split amount. So everything is looked at globally. One factor isn't more important than the other. And the judges in family court have wide discretion. So you could take the same set of facts and present it to different judges and get two totally different outcomes, which can be tough. And, as a divorce attorney, that's one of the hardest parts of my job because there's no guarantees here. All I can do is to try to guide my clients as best as possible. And something that's really important to me and that I instill into my clients is I really encourage them to try to negotiate a settlement rather than leaving all of these issues up to a stranger, because if you're in control of the terms of your settlement, you're choosing those terms and you know what you're going to get. Whereas you're just taking a total gamble if you're going to let the judge decide all of these important issues for you.
That's a really interesting point, Jolie. Can you give us an overview of what that term property even entails? Really, what is property, right? Because maybe somebody's listening to this and they're like, well, we rent our house, or we do we have property? What does property mean in a divorce?
Yeah. So property in Massachusetts, where I practice, and I think a lot of other jurisdictions too, it's everything owned by the parties. So it could be owned by just one of the spouses in their own individual name. It could be a car they own, or a business they own, or even a piece of property that's only in their name, but that's still considered part of the marital estate. So everything that's in either party's name individually or jointly. It can be real property. It can be personal property. So all of the tangible things that you have in your home, your house furnishings. And then also when we're talking about dividing property in a family court context, we're not only dividing the assets, but also the court is going to divide who pays the debts. So that also comes into play into this conversation, whether it be credit card debts, student loans, mortgages, car loans, all of that. It has to be part of this conversation too, but everything is considered.
Yeah, that's interesting. In my case, it was musical instruments. There was a lot of property there. And, different people have, it could be sports memorabilia, right? It could be all sorts of different inherited pieces of art. Yeah, very, very interesting. That was super helpful. I think that, people get so tripped up in a lot of this stuff because it's confusing. Is this where, I know when I was going through my divorce, I had to do an inventory. Is this kind of where that inventory plays into play, a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. So when we're dividing up things in what we call the marital home, so we have both parties usually create a list of things that are important to them to see how we're going to divide it up. And also some things that people might not immediately come to mind, but it is important when you think about it, is digital assets. So especially family photos nowadays, they could be all on one, computer. Wow. And then we need to make terms about getting those files copied and provided to the other party. So there's so much out there that you potentially don't even think about, but there's a lot of things. And to be honest with you, it's usually not cost effective to pay your attorneys to divide up your personal property. It would cost more for the attorneys to do it than the actual items that you're fighting about. So a lot of times what we do is each party, there'll be a list of things that they're each going to take. And then the contested items, what we do is we have them each pick one at a time. Okay, you go first. What's the most important thing here? Then it's the other party's turn. And then we just go through that until everything's divided. I mean, sentimental things, obviously those are important, but I've had clients fight over grills, vacuum cleaners, things like that.
Vacuum cleaner is, we
if you get a good vacuum cleaner, I get
it. Dyson is really
it's good, but you could always go out and just get a newer one. It will, it won't be a depreciated value. It'll probably run better. And then, save yourself those attorney's fees and just get yourself a new blender or whatever it is.
Yes, we know somewhere you can go register for those things too. So that's great advice. Super, super great advice. I think that especially, I know you take a very holistic approach to your practice, and you really want people to not be overspending and to really very humanistic side to law. So I appreciate your point of view. Divorce Happens is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the only divorce registry platform for everything you need to begin again, including home items, hype team, and everything in between. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh. We're here to support you before, during, and after divorce. Head to freshstartsregistry.com for more info.